Welcome to the second episode of the Sales Book Club podcast. Today, I will be your host. I am Zach Mofield. And gentlemen, it is a pleasure to see you. We've got a lot to cover here today. This book, New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg, is absolutely amazing. It's got a ton of information in it. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get a quick intro from everyone. We didn't do that the first episode, and we think that'd be really beneficial. Daniel, you want to start us off, buddy?
Yeah. So I'm Daniel Locke. I am in the industrial B2B space. I guess I've been in industrial B2B for 7 years. So um, between different parts of the industry, but it's all kind of process related. And now currently in capital equipment. So, but I'll pass it to Ryan and you can do your introduction.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. My name is Ryan Pugh. I work for Microsoft, but I've been in tech now for about 8 or 9 years. Just a few different tech companies now. Currently at Microsoft, pure B2B as well. Working on both their Office 365 as well as their cloud environments with selling and expanding it to our existing clients.
Awesome. And I'm Matt Nelson. I'm in the trucking, logistics, supply chain industry. Been in this industry for about 15 years, primarily selling to B2B as well. And about 6 months ago, I transitioned to an operational role as well. So I carry the mantle of sales and operations with the company that I currently work for. Pleasure to be here with all you guys. Looking forward to this discussion. This book is a game changer for anybody in sales for sure.
It's going to be hard for me to contain all of the excitement I have over this book. This is the absolute favorite sales book in my library. But go ahead and introduce it, Zach.
Yeah, so again, I'm Zach Mofield, and I work for a solar racking company. I've been here for a little over a year, got previous experience selling injection molding, and then also working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And to get to the book, like you said, Daniel, New Sales Simplified, again, by Mike Weinberg. Wow, what a lot of information there. Just a quick blurb about the book. Mike does an excellent job explaining real-world examples, giving some successes and failures he's had in his career. He really tells it how it is. And I'm a big fan of if you have worked in sales, just after reading a few pages of this, you're going to have no doubt that Mike really gets it and he knows what he's talking about. So make sure you've got your notebook ready, your highlighter ready when you're reading this, because it's going to be one that you read through multiple times, pick up something new every time, and take a lot of notes. So with that, let's go ahead and see, does anybody have a big takeaway they're just dying to tell the rest of the group here really what it's about?
Zach, this is Matt. Let me say, I agree with what you just said and what Daniel said as well. I feel so strongly about this book that I feel like every person in sales needs to be a once a year read, honestly. Because the systems and the processes and the way, let me back up. Everybody in sales except for my competitors need to read this book once a year, because the way Mike makes the systems and processes so simple to understand, and not just understand, but to put in place, it's a huge takeaway. Man, again, we're going to have a hard time fitting all of this in. I can just tell you that because I know Daniel, like he just said, he could talk about this book. Daniel, I think you're probably one of Mike Weinberg's biggest fans, right?
I was so giddy to meet him at Outbound a couple of years ago that at that time he was releasing Sales Truth, but I was such a big nerd that I brought my New Sales Simplified with me so that he can sign it as well.
Yeah,
because I'm an absolute nerd of pretty much all things Weinberg. So, and it all started with this book though, it is so powerful in what it can do to structure new business development and not just, and it's not all tactical approach either. There is some really, like chapter 8 is extremely powerful to, like you said, Matt, go through, once a year, even just to fine tune everything and remind yourself of, what the contents of this book bring to your professionalism. But, this, it just is powerful all the way through, each chapter. So what I'll say though, overall, this isn't a, overall perception. This isn't a great book for maybe account managers. And this is where why I probably love it so much is Mike is a new sales guy. I'm a new business development, I would say specialist. Account management just doesn't, it's not my deal. And that's, I think that's where people start. If you stay in sales long enough, you realize which side of those type of sales roles you end up more comfortable on. And I've definitely found I'm the new business development guy. So that's probably one of the reasons I enjoy this book so much.
Yeah, it's funny. My entry into sales was not at like a BDR role or net new. I actually started out on the account management side, but I had always viewed it as still need to expand it, still need to make my outbound calls. But I preface that by saying he called. I mean, he doesn't know me personally, but some of the actions that he called out, I felt personally, like when you're sitting back and just hoping for a good deal to come by, or just kind of relying on the goodwill of your clients. That's not a success strategy at all. And I would say that this book, and I know we'll get more into it, it almost seems like this should be a foundational sales book for everybody when they get in. Like if you're new sales, here you go. If you've been in for 10 years, here you go. Like you need to read this book because some of the points that he challenges, he does it in a way where it's not judgmental. It's just, here's the facts. He doesn't overcomplicate it. I mean, Simplified is in the name, the title of the book. Yeah, I just really enjoyed reading it and kind of expanding my own horizon as well. So I'm glad we've taken this book on.
Yeah, Ryan, those foundational sales books, for a long time, spin selling was one of those that like,
oh yeah,
if your new boss hands you spin selling. For years, that was the case. And it still carries a lot of weight today, but I feel like, especially in a new business role, if your boss doesn't hand you this book, then you need to go buy it on your own. But it is the foundational training that hopefully you're getting from, your organization. But again, that's hope is not a strategy.
No. Well, actually, I'll be honest, I'm a little frustrated because until you guys brought it up, I'd heard of this book before, but I never read it. And I'd never had a sales manager recommend it to me either. And so maybe I've just had crappy sales managers, barring my current one.
What's funny is one of the things I wrote in chapter 1 of my notes was, where did all the sales mentors go? Right. Within companies. Right. And this is where, and I'm probably a little critical of this. I think so many sales managers nowadays are ruling behind, they try to manage behind a dashboard. And this is, one of the things that Mike, hammers on, probably more so in Sales Truth, but a little bit in this book, is that one-on-one accountability with salespeople. That was a big part of what moved him in his roles previously. But that was, like I said, that's one of those things I wrote down, like, where did all the sales mentors go? Because in chapter 1, it's like, kind of laying out the land of kind of how sales currently is, as far as, how people approach it. And there's just, I feel like that's almost a sidebar conversation that on the sales mentorship part of it. But, I think you can access it, through different books, hopefully from like this podcast, we summarize part of it. But it's funny that you brought that up, because I literally wrote that down.
Well, you bring up a good point though, Daniel. Makes me wonder, I've had sales managers who are pretty young still, early 20s, but they're very technically savvy. They can build dashboards, they can run metrics. And it kind of makes me curious, actually, as we progress towards this more metric minded management philosophy, that sometimes you do need those tech savvy people that can run the dashboards really quickly, but at the same time, you don't have the mentorship. You don't have the people that have went through those tough conversations and have that experience that they can impart on their teams. And, there might be a real gap there, to your point, Daniel.
I think you guys both brought up 2 points. Again, this is Zach here. Ryan, you talked about a waiting game. And, in chapter 2, Mike talks about, he calls it the 16 reasons why salespeople fail at new business development. And one of them I have written down is a waiting game. We talk about just waiting for that next thing to close and hoping and wishing, knowing full well that it's probably not going to close. And you just need to pick up the phone and start calling the next one. The other 2 that I have down is a lazy component. It was really interesting. I like to use the term victim mentality at times. And he actually used that same term. People with a victim mentality lose, period, is what he said. And then lastly, the other big thing is they stop learning. And I think that, they don't, very few people don't invest in their own development. Like we're doing here, getting together, doing something like this, which I think actually ties back in to what Daniel had said. Maybe they don't have people to learn from. Daniel touched on, their mentors or their dashboard managers, so to speak. Fortunately for me, in a previous role, I had a great mentor that really understood what it was like to hop in the car and do the things that Mike talked about. It was astonishing to read some of the stuff. Like, hey, what's our goal for the call? What's our call plan? What are we going to do if this happens? What's going to happen if X, Y, and Z? And at the time, I guess I thought, hey, it's a really nice thing to do, but I guess I just didn't even know that wasn't the norm. So the point there is, if you're reading this and you feel like you're a leader, you can be a mentor to anyone. I don't care how old you are. If you're fresh out of college, if you're, almost to the retirement age, you can do it. And don't be afraid to do it either. I think too many times people may feel, well, they're my elder or something like that, because I know personally I've struggled with that. But hey, resources are resources. I don't care if you're 25, 65, 95. As long as you're still alive, there's a reason. So great points, fellas.
Can I ask a question based on what you just said? Because you brought up chapter 2. Looking at those 16 reasons, and I'll answer my question after I ask it and give you guys time to think about it. You might already have the answer. What would you feel like is your not so sweet 16 reason for not generating new business? I know for me, I have to spend so much time babysitting my existing accounts. It's almost daily, if not many times throughout the day. I'm in the middle of prospecting or in the middle of doing something else, which clearly means I haven't blocked that time good enough. But I get an urgent need from an existing account that takes me away from what I need to be doing, which is generate new business. And so for me, of those 16, that is the one that I most easily gravitate to, that takes me away from generating new business. Just curious, Daniel, what do you feel like yours is?
Yeah, so I had written down my top 3 sins, and then my I'd say the 3 positive attributes of those 16. I mean, there's plenty to choose from, but probably the first one is kind of similar, but the protecting your time, the time blocking part of that is always been a struggle. I've always struggled with that. I'm part of I have a meandering thought process, and I think there's times where the creativity that comes from that is really beneficial, but at the same time, it's also a hindrance when you don't set aside that time every day, to go prospect. Then the well runs dry relatively quickly once you start qualifying and closing business. And so that's the first one. The ownership of the sales process is kind of the other one that I acquiesce a lot of times, just because I think I can be a little relational even as a new business development guy. Building relationships, with and connections with other people, I think is one of the most important parts of sales. And sometimes, you kind of, I have a habit of letting that get in the way of owning the sales process and getting those, the next steps, or owning that pipeline. So I'll say we'll come back to the the three things you do best after Ryan answers.
Yeah, I can easily point out what I do wrong. So uh, probably because for most of my career in sales, I've been on the account management side. Just how I've defaulted to. Um, it's always easy to prioritize a burning bridge with a client versus blocking out time. And even though I felt like the book was very relevant, though, because even though I've pretty much been in existing business for bulk of my career, there's still expansion. There's still outbound prospecting, new departments that I have to call into, and blocking off that time. I don't always do it. I also sometimes haven't always seen the value in doing it. Um, for one reason or the other. And so, and then probably what you were mentioning as well, Daniel. I'm very relational. So sometimes you allow that to obscure the fact that, hey, there are hard and fast targets that both I have as a quota carrying member of my team, as well as there's certain needs of the client that we don't want the relationship to get in the way of. And so those are probably two things easily that I felt like called me out right away. I was semi aware of it before, but it's always nice to see it again in black and white.
Accountability, even if it's coming from a book, is still accountability, right?
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, great insight there, fellas. And Matt, I appreciate the question. Yeah, so the 16 that of the 16 things, I'd say the one that I struggle the most with, or have the most opportunity to improve, would really be the story. Mike mentions can't tell a story, and I think it was Daniel, if I remember correctly, touched on chapter 8. It's funny because I got a big old circle around that one of, hey, go back and read this. I have all bold letters on my notes here that say, hey, if you don't do anything, at least buy the book and read chapter 8. Because there's just a ton of content in there about how to create your story. That's really, you can go back to the well many times over and really learn. The chapter 8 is called Sharpening Your Sales Story. So that would be the biggest one for me to improve upon.
So what about what are of those 16, what do you guys feel your best strength is? Kind of inverse of that. They're written more of in a negative light, but which one you're like, I've got that one. I would say for me, account selection is I'm laser focused on who I want to do business with. It's the spray and pray method that some people live by. Is I cannot fathom doing business like that. It makes no sense to me. Matt, what about yours?
That's a great question. Probably, and this will go to a later question on what we feel like our greatest sales tools are. I like the phone, and clearly, I'm the senior member of this group, and I'm an old school guy, so I will always err toward the phone versus a text or an email. I still think the phone is the greatest tool we have in sales, and so having a phone conversation for me comes really natural. So that's kind of my go-to, is to get on the phone. If you're having a problem, if you have a question you need answered, I'm telling people all the time, did you call them? Did you call them? Did you call them? You got to pick up the phone and call people. And so that's probably my greatest. What about you, Ron?
Yeah. So for me, the ability to continue learning, that's actually a hallmark for me just personally. So I don't find that to be a struggle. Also, I feel like I can guide a sales conversation pretty well. I do always enter a sales conversation with what is my desired end state for both me and my client, and I really keep to that. And ultimately, I'm a little lazy as a salesperson, so I prefer to work with accounts that I know I'm going to make money off of. And so, account selection is probably my third one that I rely on heavily. I just don't feel like wasting my time with the ones that won't make me money. So,
That goes to like the whole Jeb Blunt thing of bending win probabilities in your favor. That's one of Jeb Blunt's big kind of quotes or
yeah.
mantras is bending win probabilities in your favor.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, actually, I've met him. I've had training from him. He says that. So maybe I'm not lazy. Maybe I'm smart.
You're smart. That's what I was going to say. It's not laziness, man. It's smart. What about you, Ryan? What do you feel like? I'm sorry, Zach. What do you feel like your biggest strength is on those?
Yeah. So I would say real quick, Ryan, it's great. I call them RGAs is what I want to do. Revenue generating activities. So I think any smart person does that. You see that Mike talking about that. And like you guys mentioned, Jeb, as far as me, I'd say the top two for me are just, Mike says, you have become negative or pessimistic. I feel like for me, I'm just too happy go lucky. Hey, okay, you said no, sweet. I'm one no closer to a yes. Like just pick up the phone and dial again. And then the other one would be stop learning and growing. I feel like I do about the exact opposite of that. Through reading these books with you guys, getting together and learning new things. I've connected with a few other people at Outbound that, at least in my opinion, are highly respected, and I highly respect them. And we try and at least meet about once a month, and do things.
Is it us?
Well, obviously it'd be you guys too, but there's another fellow that I met that is very knowledgeable, and he's got a lot of firsthand knowledge from Jeb Blunt, we'll say. So it's just great to get with other like-minded people. And I think we mentioned last episode you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I'm really looking to always try and raise that level of my surroundings, and then hopefully I'm doing the same for them as well.
So is it safe to say that all 4 of us have the learning and growing as a like a top 3 strength of that list? That's what I kind of thought, especially since we're the genesis of the whole podcast itself is learning and growing. I thought we probably all share that in common.
Yeah, there's a bit of a sample bias for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt, man. I do think it was a challenge. I think someone asked us the other day, how do you measure the ROI in that? Are you seeing a real return? And I think we do. I mean, I don't know if you can measure it as far as a measurable goal, but it has to be. You have to be. If you're learning and growing, you got to be getting better in your craft, and our craft is sales. So clearly, yeah.
Yeah, you could easily look at. I like to read sales books, but this forces us to read them, right? And holds us accountable. So that alone, I think, is a win.
And I think
Hey,
you made
Zach,
go
I
ahead,
could have
Danny.
swore that your top attribute was going to be being likable and empathetic, because I don't know nobody. I don't see anybody that can't hate you.
Yeah, that's why
Oh
we're
man,
all here. That's why we're all here, because you're so likable, man.
yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate it. I've heard it before a couple times. Actually, Jeb even said it in the breakout sessions, the because statement on Friday. I was there. He goes, Zach, you're a likable guy. Just talk to him. And so I appreciate it. I guess I just try to stay. I don't want to say more. I guess I just try to be humble, and I look at that and go, okay, well, I do my best. So I appreciate it.
So moving, I kind of want to because we're like I said, we could probably talk for 2 hours on this book, and I thought chapter 3 there's a couple of really good points in chapter 3, and essentially sales follows strategy. It was is kind of the mantra of chapter 3, and with that I like how Mike kind of starts to really delineate the differences between like a hunter and farmer mentality, and again going back to what the book is about is new business is he makes a point here that a new business dollar in his mind is more valuable than recurring dollars. And I thought that was really powerful because you can grow by cross-selling and upselling, but there's going to be limits based on your company's ability, whatever their breadth and product market or product mix is. And so at some point to keep growing, somebody has to go get something new. And so those are different skill sets though. They really, as coming like Ryan, like I started in more of an account management role with my first sales job. And I realized really quickly, that's just, it's just not working for me. And so, um, I think that the other where he starts to tie that into is, aligning the pay plan with the business goals, and kind of, again, that goes to delineating the roles. And so that I think that, that sets up the following, chapters, I thought, pretty well.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've been, oh, sorry, Zach, did I speak over you? Um, so I've been at some companies where we had a large sales force and we did not delineate those roles at all. And I've been at companies where we did. Um, it to your point, Daniel, there's definitely a differentiation in skill set and just what people feel comfortable with on a sales team. And this book is almost like a blueprint. Like if you're a brand new sales manager, I would read this book and just start applying some of those rules to your team.
Ironically, his next book that he wrote after this one was Sales Management Simplified.
Okay, maybe we'll have to do that one then.
Yeah, because you're right, though. They do kind of lie. They do. It really hits on a lot of that strategy. Sorry, Zach, go ahead.
You're good. I think both of you guys make a great point. Ryan, you talked about, if you're a sales manager, I have the note down here and highlighting everything because I want to make sure we got to this, was smart people work the comp plan. If there's no incentive to drive the behavior that you want as a company, you need to fix that. And I have the note next to it. If you're a manager, make sure what you're rewarding for drives the behavior you want. If you want someone to go be a hunter, reward them well for it. Don't put a cap on it and stuff like that. Say, hey, we understand it's a challenge to go get this. And then, he talks about earlier in that chapter too, it's the sales organization, or excuse me, the salesperson is entitled to the sales organization having a super clear answer for where they're going and why we're going there and stuff like that. It was just great reading that because I've been at some places where it's not really that clear. It's all in the sales. They literally had the president say, where do you think we should go? And as a new sales, outside sales rep, I didn't know any different. I didn't know that's not how it was supposed to be. And then as you progress through your career and learn that it's not always like that. So I guess to wrap that up, if you're in management, make sure the comp plan rewards what you want and give them some clear expectations and directions on where to go.
Zach, something you said, reminded me of something I think maybe a lot of managers may forget, and that, the strategy is important, and it gets even more important when you have long sales cycles. So, where I'm at now is, it could be up to a year long sales cycle on major capital equipment. And if the strategy may change between now and not just when, the sales cycle might be a year long, the execution phase of that's another year long. And so if the strategy happens to shift underneath that process, everything that you've done through that sales process may have to get reworked or approached differently. And so, that concrete strategy is really important, particularly in my opinion, on long sales cycles.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And when I was in that spot that I had those challenges, we'll say it was a long sales cycle. I always said 3 months to infinity, because if they signed up today and said, here's the PO, it's 3 months before you can even get in to production or building a tool or what have you. So it's very important to communicate, to wrap up your point, Daniel. Great point.
Yeah, and I think a takeaway too, I had a role one time. It was pure new business, but the sales cycle was about 18 months long. But the rest of the company, they had roughly a 3 to 6 month sales cycle. So I was kind of an outlier on that one, but it was just the product set that I sold. But the problem was the comp plan was tailored to a 3 to 6 month sales cycle. And so about 7 months in, I started getting questions from my management. Hey, why are you failing? Why have you not succeeded? And I kept explaining, hey, the nature of this product is not the same, but the incentives were misaligned, and as a result, I felt like a failure most of the time, even though I really wasn't, because it was kind of a learning process for us and sales management. But I think Zach, you bring up an excellent point that you need to have a comp plan that both rewards your salespeople, but also is aligned with the true nature of what they're selling. Otherwise, you're going to have turnover, is the reality in your sales team, and you're going to not really have a successful, culture in place.
Yeah, very, very well said, Ryan. And I think that's a great transition into another chapter that I liked. Was chapter 5. It talked about selecting targets first for a reason. And with that, some bullet points I have down on that are a finite list of targets. And I think that can relay back to, like you're saying, the sales cycle. Well, why are we going after these people? Well, we know because X, Y, and Z. That's why. And then, to focus the list and have those finite targets, I think times, and even myself in previous roles, there's so many people out there that you could potentially sell to, but where do you try and cap it at? Mike talks about a workable list or a manageable list, whatever that may be. And I was curious to hear kind of what your guys' thoughts are on that. Kind of how do you guys go about selecting targets, and then also what would you consider workable? Is that a number, or is that a revenue dollar? Matt, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, great question, Zach. One of the things that I put into practice after I attended Outbound 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and I think it was probably a combination of teaching from everybody that I heard, is that I generated a list that I operate off of on a daily basis, and I keep it at the front of my binder, keep it on my computer. I've got 3 lists. One is growable existing accounts that I have. The other is ideal prospects. And these are companies that do what my customers are already doing. They're in the same industry. I'm looking at, from a shipping standpoint, companies that we're delivering to. Those are always prospects for us, because that's not usually our customer, but it's the person that we ship the material for. And then of course I have my dream clients, and those are your Fortune 500s. Those are the big fish. And so that's a list that I keep active. I don't use a CRM anymore. I in the previous jobs I've been in, I've had CRMs that I've had to maintain and manage. And so for me, this is just a hard copy on a notebook piece of paper. And if you saw it, you would see scratches and notes, and I update it once a year and take some people off, move some people through. But those 3 lists, that growable existing, the ideal prospects, and the dream clients, that for me is how I stay on target, how I stay on task. Great question. What
You
about
are
you?
the ultimate old school guy, Matt.
I'm old school. See my notebook?
Hey, it works.
That's right.
How many calling cards do you still have, like in a drawer somewhere,
How many calling cards,
Matt?
like business cards?
No,
No,
calling cards where you got to go
calling
up to the
card.
payphone.
You talking about my Rolodex?
No. When you're on the road, you had to dial the 1-800 like collect number or
Oh, man,
whatever.
I've only been in sales for 15 years. I'm not that old. Y'all talking about like Gittimer age now. That's not me, man. I'm not that old.
You know what I'll say, just in general, is I love the fact that we all have very different industries that we're in,
I do too.
but the book is applicable to each one of us.
Right.
And I think that's a strength of this book. So it doesn't really matter what vertical you're in industry. This book is applicable.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, it's distilled down to its most basic functions. I'll take over where that question that Zach, that you had asked Matt, and I would say, the way I look at it, and I don't want to foreshadow too much, but our next book, Anthony Iannarino's Eat Your Lunch, I love how the 2 of these books I pair them together. And it just so happened that when we selected the books we're going to read, these 2 are side by side. But essentially, I have kind of taken away too much from that book, but I have that list of I call them, the ideal prospects. And the way that I've gotten to that is, you look at, okay, who is the absolute best client that we have? they're hard to lose, they're profitable, they're low maintenance. That's kind of the way I look at it. I'm like, all right, now, because if I had 10 of those, oh, my life would be so much easier. So who do they look like, right? Is it, a similar organizational structure, similar client base? Like, you kind of have to look at it that way. And that's the way I've approached it. Is like, okay, which is the least, how can I just take the same approach and results from this company and just work my way into the next one via whatever method it takes to get into it, from a prospecting perspective. But that's the way I look at okay, who's that ideal client profile? I see you, Ryan, shaking your head a bunch.
Yeah. So my previous role I was at, we were a pretty small company and we were still trying to identify what that ideal customer profile was. But, I think to a certain degree, sales is not rocket science. I mean, it's very much a profession. But uh, to your point, Daniel, what I did was to figure out where to expand because I was tasked with both new business and expansion. There was I would just look at who my successful clients currently were. What did they look like? And I would just go find another one in the same industry and start calling into it. Wasn't that hard? And you could kind of look at, all right, here's what I've done at this client. I can speak to their challenges. I can speak to what the value is that we can provide, and I can just share that story with this prospect. And that's really how I've applied it. There's been other times when sometimes the list is just handed down from above, but I found a lot of times even in that scenario, you can still look at where your strong clients are or strong prospects are and just build upon that.
I think y'all make a great point, and you said I think we've all really touched on looking at where your current clients are. Some of the questions that Mike has in the book is, who are our best customers? Why do they initially become customers? Who do we compete against in the marketplace? And he goes on for more of that. And it's really interesting, Matt, that you showed us. He held up on the screen there that you physically had him written down because he mentions that in chapter 5 as well. A written list, physically written out or printed, if you will, and right there by you. And like we text the text I sent this morning, you guys could see the goals, the sales goals for the rest of the year out there. Just because it's true. I can put that in a CRM, but until it's right there, top of mind all the time. I heard a thing one time about somebody got 2 jars and they put like these marbles in it, and there was like 15 of them or whatever. And every time they make their goal was make 15 cold calls a day or whatever it was. They would take a marble out and put it in the other jar just because before they went home, all the marbles had to be in the other jar. So I think it's great that you write that stuff down. You've got it there. You know where it's at, and it's right in front of you. And then even to furthermore that, Matt, you talked about segmenting it a little bit further. Mike also talked about that, about in terms of dollars, most growable, most at risk, and then even having like those dream accounts where when you land this, it's, hey, this could be life changing, or this is definitely going to have a massive impact on you personally and the company for that matter. So all great points, fellas.
It reminded me of there's one that I left out, and this in a previous role was selling MRO consumables, and there was a few. It wasn't a big portion of my list, but I would intentionally put 2 or 3 clients that I knew if my competitor lost those, they would be just they'd be upset with themselves. And essentially, and the way I looked at it was, okay, this might be really, really hard for me to get into, but the impact that it would have to shake up, the dynamic of the marketplace, is huge, because it can make a statement of like, oh yeah, they were a loyal client of XYZ for 30 years, and it took some effort, but we converted them over. That that goes a long way. Other than, oh yeah, we snapped up all the stuff that they didn't want.
Kind of like when Sprint took the Verizon guy.
Yes, I forgot about that. That's so true.
Very, very good point, Ryan. I remember seeing that, and I was like, "Wow!" Talk about just a shock to, I guess, really that industry, if you will. At least from my perspective, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
So great
Can you
point, Daniel.
imagine if
What's that? Go ahead, buddy.
can can you imagine if Flow was it took over for Geico?
Right.
That would that would that would change the dynamic of the marketplace.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think we make a great point here. And I wanted to get to this, and it's a great time to get to it today. In chapter 15, kind of closing out the book here, Mike talks about rant, raves, and reflections. And he had a really great paragraph page right around there about chase after that massive competitor, because really, when it comes down to it, it's you versus that other sales rep, and I'm a big fan of Kobe Bryant's work ethic. It's just you. So are you going to let one other person beat you? Or are you going to get up at 4 a.m. and figure out how to get in and do some research to get around the gatekeeper or whatever it may be? And he talks about that. Yeah, it may be a massive company that you're competing against, but it's most likely one sales rep. You got to beat one guy to have a massive change in your industry, your life, or for your company. So great point.
Yeah, I think in chapter 15, Zach, his writing on attitude is some of the most gold material in the book. And I'm just going to read a couple sentences off of page 201. He says, I've got one more thought about your attitude. He said, you do realize that the rest of the people in your company look to the sales organization to set the pace, to create hope for the future, and to deliver the results. If we understand the responsibility that we carry, so often in guys who do what we do, we carry the stigma, we're sales guys, man. It's an honor. It should be an honor when we understand that the future and the people that work in our company are looking to us to produce when we show up. And so with that mindset, and that's a game changer. And when you truly understand that that's what shapes your attitude, it makes you want to get up and go to work and crush those goals every day, I think. Any thoughts on that?
I agree. So my first job out of college, I was in more of an operational role, and then I transitioned into tech and went to a sales role. And I remember I had some friends. They said, "Oh, is that a sales job that you're doing?" And they kind of poo-pooed it, and I was a little sheepish. I said, "Yeah, it is." And then, the longer I've been in this profession, the more I'm like, why would I be embarrassed about that? Like, one, we're providing value to our clients. We're increasing revenue for our companies. Everybody that's doing like the back office jobs, their salary is directly impacted by our efforts, right? And so it's an honorable profession. And I think Mike does a great job of presenting it in such a light as well in the book.
It's great point, Ryan and Matt. I'm really glad you brought that up about the just having a positive outlook on stuff. He talked about also in that chapter, don't get sucked into the negative conversation. I'm sure we've all been there before. You get around one employee who is probably got one foot out the door, or they're just not happy with the current situation. And you kind of just let it snowball and fester and it get bigger, and you think, oh, well, this went wrong and this here and stuff like that. Bringing it back to what you said, Matt, people looking to us because we're the salespeople. I can't remember who said it, but someone said, nothing happens until something is sold. And that's really true. At least I believe so. And I'm sure us as sales professionals would think that, if we don't go out and sell something, there's not going to be a paycheck for the person that's going to help get the order ready to get on the truck and process the order. And the list goes on and on and on. And I think if you come to work with that mindset, I'll take a page from Larry Levine's book. That's really selling from the heart, because I'm helping provide for these other people too, in a holistic way, if you will.
Agreed. It's funny, Matt. I've been that negative person before. with my foot out the door. I don't really like being that person, but sometimes you get in that mindset. And so his whole chapter on mindset, I think, is very important, and it's just a good reminder, right? Where sales is emotional as well, and so we have to have the right emotions in place to be successful. Oh, we're getting more additions to the team, more windows.
Yeah. So, one of the underlying themes kind of across the book uh, is kind of sales culture, right? It's not like the main theme of the book, but it's kind of like an underlying tone, talking about attitude. And he shares actually a couple of anecdotal stories of like, of, you know, good modeled sales culture, like with his mentor. I think it's in like chapter 3 or so. And, and I think he goes on in some future books as well to talk about how important that is. But um, I would say to try to keep us on track because we're pushing time and we haven't even hit the most important chapter of the book yet. Um, the structuring your sales story. But before we get to that, there's a couple of points I wanted to get to, and chapter 6, he kind of lists it's a setup chapter for 7 and 8, and it says where are all these tools that salespeople have in their tool belt. You're right, or he calls them sales weapons, and I think he did a pretty good job with all of those. One thing I would say is that kind of got left, and I said maybe not left out. This book, I think he had originally published it in like 2013 or so, but it's a pretty exhaustive list. It covers 4 pages of sales weapons and kind of brief summaries on how to use them. But it didn't cover video, which probably kind of dates the book a little bit. And he doesn't mention direct mail, and I've actually had some really good success with direct mail. It has to be very personable, but I think that, don't let the list of weapons is not finite. It's however, kind of like going back to Jeb Blunt, one of the things he says a lot is if you have to send smoke signals to get your prospect's attention, then light a fire, right? Use a carrier pigeon. And so I think all of those have those ideas of use whatever you can have merit, but it's kind of like but leading into like chapter 8, it's like, okay, you've got them, and it's kind of like my dog when he caught a rabbit. He caught the rabbit, great. And then he didn't know what to do, and he just kind of let it go. It was like the chase is over. But that's where I think the sales story really comes in. Is okay, however it is that you get there, and you have all of these tools available for you. The Before getting into the line by line content of it, what I find most powerful about having a really well articulated story is that it sets up the differentiation immediately, and then the discovery, because as having practiced this for several years, the discovery after a well articulated story is so much more open and flows a whole lot easier than if you just kind of go in there without a good way to articulate your company and how you what kind of impacts you guys have. I was kind of curious on everybody's thoughts, just kind of at a high level on the sales story, because I think for Ryan and Zach, you guys I don't think had read it before, and I think we all agreed it's a big chapter, but kind of what are your, without breaking it down at a high level, Zach, what were your thoughts on that aspect of the book?
Yeah, I thought, Daniel, that was a great question and a great setup for what Chapter 8 was really about. A couple things that really stuck out from that. Actually, in Chapter 7, he talked about having a premium price requires a premium story. And then transitioning into Chapter 8 there, your story's really got to pass the so what test. When I read that, I was like, that's so true. Hey, we do this, and that. I don't care. What are you going to do for me? And I find myself when people will try and sell me something, call me at work. Well, That's if they actually pick up the phone and call. But if they send an email and stuff like that, it's like it's so true. It's so much about we do this and this and this. Create that story of I understand you. These are the challenges we help people or businesses or whatever it may be solve. And then, like you're saying, Daniel, when you're able to tell them that, the discovery, they're going to be asking you questions. Well, what about this? What about that? They're going to want to know what you can do because you've given them a story of this here. And by doing that, they're asking you questions, which is in turn, you're discovering more about them. Well, hey, they asked about this. They asked about this. How does this work? Can you do this? It, like you're saying, it just would help discovery exponentially because they're open. You're having a conversation. You're sitting next to them at the table instead of across from them, so to speak. Like Mike talks about later on in the book somewhere. It's great. So really the ability to just move a sales conversation along and really be a trusted advisor. So what are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, there's other books that cover this too, but the power of why, like, why does it matter what this does? And I had a great sales manager early in my career who, if he heard me talking about features and the latest and greatest in our platform, he would cut it off immediately. He'd be like, "This is not of any value to our clients. You need to figure out, all right, this new feature set, why does it matter to our clients?" And I had that hounded into me early on in my career. And so telling that sales story for me is a natural thing now. I always look at what is the desired end state and the desired outcome for our client, and then how am I going to get there? And so I really liked how the chapter 8 really focused on that, telling the power of the story, because I'm in tech. There's a lot of people that do the same exact thing that I do. Even at being at a big company, there's competitors, and but the story of why and how it's impacted people, I think, is very important for anybody, regardless of what industry they're in. So I really enjoyed that chapter. I think it just reiterated some things that I do in my own life.
Fellas, we have covered a lot of stuff in this book, and there's some stuff that I've got written down, bullet points highlighted that we haven't even got to, and I'm sure we can discuss that at another time. And by all means, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't read this book, it's the best $20 I think you can ever spend. And with that, what let's go around and just say one action item that we would each take from this. And I'll go ahead and start so you guys can think about it. I think the biggest thing for me is really getting that sales story down and developing what client issues I can address, what offerings we then have, and then differentiators. Because if you lead with client issues and they don't have any, then it helps you qualify, and then it's a better ROI of the time. So that's the biggest thing that I'm going to take away and start implementing. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I would piggyback exactly on what you just said, Zach, is that to sharpen that story and to make that story not about me, but about that prospect or that customer, and craft it in such a way that it's about them and about how I can serve them, and how what the services I provide will help them accomplish their goals, cut their costs, so forth and so on. And then also, every time I read one of these books, especially from the guys from Outbound, I'm always reminded of the importance of time blocking. I mean, it's such a simple thing, but man, it's easy to do. It's harder to honor it and to be disciplined, to stay in that block, to close out those distractions, and focus on that block of time for prospecting or whatever I'm supposed to be doing in that block. So that's always a reminder of a discipline I need to put in place. Ryan, you got anything?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it to you guys before. I prefer to listen to my books on Audible just because I drive or whatnot. But this is one book where I have a hard copy, because just the fact that rereading it and taking notes, I think, is very important. But I heard something said the other day, like lack of focus, or people that dabble, that's what prevents you from being successful. There's all these distractions in our life. You can do pottery one day and cooking class the next. You're not good at either of them. But we're sales professionals, and this book, like just diving into it and just following along with what Mike writes about, I think can really give us that focus when it comes to how we present ourselves as sales professionals. And so my takeaway from it was just um, reiterating that sales story, but also just some of those foundational principles of making those outbound calls, being relational, trying to solve a problem. That for me is just a great takeaway that I want to build upon.
That's good points, Ryan. Obviously, I don't think it can be understated on how important on building the sales story it really is across this book. I mean, that's essentially there's 3 chapters essentially that go into either setting up the sales story, or that chapter 8 is basically the walkthrough on how to do it, and he gives some incredible examples. I really love. I really loved. I have to say this differentiator, because I just love it so much that he has in here. Don't call me for customer service training, because I won't do it. And there's other better choices if you're looking to improve the babysitting skills of account managers. Sorry, Ryan. You only want me if you're serious about increasing new sales. Now, what I love about that is it sets a just crystal clear tone on what it is that he does and what his specialty is. And so it's because there's a lot of, well, I do this, well, like that's great, there's a bunch of other options out there, but it's so it's so crystal clear. And he uses a couple, he goes into, you have to use some of those emotional words, which I think are really important, because he gets, you don't come off as salesy, when you use that, because who's going to say, like, yeah, they call, people call me because they get frustrated that their stuff doesn't work. It's like, okay, that's easy to connect with emotion. And I thought, the way he lines the whole chapter out on, and it's like a how-to guide, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. When I'll say there's a second part of this book, and I don't think it probably gets enough credit. And I almost would love to see Mike write an entire book off chapter 11. And it was, which was, structuring winning sales calls, and really going through, a lot more detail on, he does okay on the detail. It really it's kind of a second afterthought of the book, but structuring winning sales calls, I think, is incredibly important. And then kind of tying with that, good discovery, really teaching people how to do good discovery I see it as a challenge. All the other, in previous roles, my, fellow sales employees, they just didn't know how. And it more or less comes naturally to people like us who are like we're just inquisitive, right? That opens up that door to discovery a lot. But I thought, man, that you can just write a whole book on that, which which is funny, because you get to chapter 12 and that's essentially about objections. I'm like, well, Jeb Blunt wrote that book, so I had a couple of notes in there. But no, did you guys come away with, like, on that chapter 11, kind of in a similar thought?
Yeah, I did. Because it's not always well taught. I think people overcomplicate sales sometimes, and he does a great job of just like clarifying step by step. Here's what a good sales call is like. Here's what discovery looks like. Here's what prospecting looks like. He really covers all the meat and potatoes of being a sales professional, and spells it out very concisely.
Yeah, I think great point, Daniel. I mean, the biggest note I have on that chapter 11, structuring winning sales calls, is have a next step. Too many times I feel like reps or sales people, whatever you want to call them, walk out, we're high fiving each other and all that stuff. Man, that was a great meeting. You get back to the main office or whatever. So what are we going to do next? And it's just blank stares and silence, right? I have no idea, but man, they really liked us.
No scheduled next meeting or anything,
Yeah,
right?
nothing, nothing. But it was a great meeting though.
I'll send you a
Uh,
quote.
yes,
Right.
yeah. So I that was just the biggest thing I had down takeaway on
The
that. Matt, do you have
he
something to add?
starts off. I forgot to get to this. He does start off that chapter that basically a sales call is like a flight plan. And it's a really really good metaphor because a flight plan you have the prep work right before the pilots take off. They walk around the plane, then they go through they get in the cockpit and they go through the checklist. Okay, here's this, all checking everything, and then each one of those steps, it's all structured, but it's structured for a reason. And I thought it was a really really great metaphor. And it's easy to visualize that of before you go out, and this maybe a little bit less so than it used to. I think this chapter is more written for a lot more like face-to-face sales calls, but the it helps put that into like and visualize. Okay, how does this how do I need to approach walking into this client?
Yeah. That chapter, guys, was such a reminder for me of all the mistakes I've made. Honestly, it's somewhat embarrassing. I'm thinking about a sales call I went on, and it was a large aerospace company in the north part of the state of Alabama. I'll just leave it at that. And we took our full executive team in there. We had an hour, and we walked in there and we had our slides, we had our presentation, we did everything wrong. And as a result of that, we got zero business. I mean, this is a dream. You can't get dreamier than this. It's like going to space big. That's how big it is. And walked out there with no next steps, nothing, just here we are. This is who we are. See you guys later. And we left. Man, so just walking in, knowing that, having a plan, knowing that it's not about you, and then having clearly defined next steps, huge, huge.
I
So
know we need to wrap up, but
yeah.
that reminds me
And Daniel's
his.
never gonna let this book wrap up, by the way.
Oh my god, I know it. The presentation thing, again, a really good visualization. Like as he goes through on chapter 13 is about presentation. It sounds like he wrote that whole story that he writes going on chapter 13 sounds like what you had to experience, Matt. And that's
Mhm. It
honestly, if
is.
you're gonna if you if someone is going to be going into a client and giving a presentation, like if that meeting is booked, and this goes for anybody listening to this, read the first part of chapter 13 to make sure you walk in and you don't do what Mike experienced in the front part of that chapter, because it is all of these sins all compiled into a single sales call. And I love it. I try to practice it. I have a whole. I came away from that chapter the first time I read it with an entire different approach on how I wanted to structure those meetings, and that was probably, aside from the sales story, the first time I read this, that was the second biggest takeaway that I got out of this book was crap. Do not do
What I did.
the shut up the show up and throw up method of sales presentations. That was yeah.
You almost have to experience it though to realize how big of a mistake it is, because I think we've all probably had those experiences.
Great, great point, everyone, on that last point there. I think it's so true. Be unique and be memorable. Right. Mike gives a couple stories of that. So to kind of wrap it up here, Ryan, you had a great point earlier. We always try and say, do we recommend this book at the end of the podcast? And Ryan, earlier you said it's applicable for all of us, and it's crazy how we're all in four completely different industries. So without going around, I'm sure all of us would obviously recommend this book. It was great. I can't wait to get back into chapter 8, highlight some more, refine my sales plan, revisit this in 6 months and say, wow, you thought you were doing terrible then, and you've done a lot of work, and then look, you got a lot to go. But it's really going to be interesting to see where all of us go from here. Our next book is going to be Eat Their Lunch by Anthony Iannarino. And I'm really looking forward to this here. It sounds like it goes hand in hand. I personally have not read it before, but just listening to Anthony speak at Outbound this year, you get an understanding of just how intelligent and the knowledge that Anthony brings. So I can't wait to tackle this one here, guys. I really hope everyone tunes into episode 3. As always, it's been a pleasure, and we really hope this, if nonetheless, it brings value to at least one person.